And let's not forget speed. Native speakers often speak very quickly, dropping sounds, blending words, and using contractions or reductions. At earlier levels, that feels terrifying. At C2, it should be exciting. You want to reach the point where fast English is not a problem, but a joy. A great way to practice is to listen at normal speed first, then challenge yourself with slightly faster playback on YouTube or podcast apps. When you can handle that speed, normal conversation will feel easy. Your brain is like a runner training with weights on their ankles. When the weights come off, you fly. Now, something I always remind advanced learners is that listening is not only about understanding others, it's also about training your brain to think in English. The more you listen, the more your inner voice starts adopting English phrases, rhythm, and even humor. You begin to notice that instead of translating in your head, you just respond naturally because the patterns are already inside you. Listening builds that inner database of language that feeds every other skill: speaking, writing, reading. It's the foundation, and at C2, the more input you get, the more natural your output becomes. So how should you practice listening every day at this level? The answer is simple: variety and consistency. Every day, make sure your ears touch English in different forms. Maybe a podcast in the morning, a news broadcast at lunch, a comedy show in the evening. Mix serious content with fun content. Mix accents and styles. And don't just listen passively while multitasking. Dedicate some time to really focus, to break down what you hear, to shadow, to analyze. Think of it as going to the gym for your ears. If you lift the same weight every day, you won't grow. If you challenge yourself with heavier and different weights, you get stronger. And I want to leave you with this thought about listening at C2. It's not just about skill, it's about identity. When you can listen at this level, you are no longer outside the circle, struggling to catch up. You are inside the conversation, laughing at the same jokes, reacting at the same time, sharing the same cultural references. That's the difference between advanced English and mastered English. And I promise you, if you keep pushing yourself, if you stay curious, if you chase variety and embrace discomfort, your listening will reach a point where English feels like second nature. Now that we've opened the journey by focusing on listening, I want to shift our energy towards speaking, because speaking is the skill that everyone dreams about, the one that makes you feel truly fluent. And at the C2 level, speaking is not just about being able to produce sentences quickly. You've already reached the stage where you can explain your ideas, join conversations, and talk about almost any subject, but at this higher level the focus becomes refinement, subtlety, persuasion, and natural rhythm. It's about sounding not only correct but also sophisticated, about being able to adapt your voice and your style to different situations, whether you're having a friendly chat, delivering a formal presentation, or joining a debate. Speaking at the C2 level is like playing an instrument at concert level. You're not just hitting the right notes, you're shaping the sound, interpreting the music, creating emotion. And that is the beauty of mastering spoken English. When you think about speaking fluently, it's easy to picture speed, words flowing without pause, but true fluency is not about speaking quickly. True fluency is about speaking comfortably, with control, with pauses that feel natural, with intonation that matches your message, and with vocabulary that fits the moment. At C2, you want to move past thinking, "Do I know the right grammar here?" and into thinking, "How can I make my message more powerful, more elegant, more persuasive?" This is the level where you can choose whether to sound casual or formal, playful or serious, direct or diplomatic. That flexibility is what shows you've truly mastered English speaking. One of the best ways to develop this skill is to practice a wide range of speaking contexts. Many advanced learners get stuck in one style. They can speak well in casual conversations with friends, but they struggle when asked to give a formal speech or the other way around. To be C2, you need to move across these registers smoothly. Try telling a simple story first as if you were chatting with a friend, then retell the same story as if you were presenting it to an academic audience. Then try again as if you were a storyteller entertaining children. Notice how the vocabulary changes, the rhythm changes, the energy in your voice changes. This flexibility is what marks a speaker at the highest level. But let's also talk about nuance, because nuance is where advanced speaking really shines. Nuance means the little shades of meaning you can create by choosing one word instead of another, by stressing one syllable instead of another, by adding a slight pause, or by using humor or irony. For example, think about how different it feels to say, "That's interesting," with a flat tone, versus saying it with rising intonation that shows real curiosity, versus saying it with a slow, ironic tone that actually means you're not impressed. At C2, you want to play with these tools because communication is not only about the words, it's about the feelings those words carry. Another skill that becomes important at this level is persuasion. You want to be able to convince, to influence, to make your arguments clear and compelling. This is especially important if you use English in professional or academic settings. One exercise you can try is to take a topic you care about and practice giving a mini speech where you try to persuade your listener. Use connectors like, "On the other hand, it could be argued that, nevertheless, to a certain extent," and so on. Practice building your points step by step, supporting them with examples, and finishing with a strong conclusion. This not only improves your speaking, but also makes you a better thinker in English. And let's not forget spontaneity. At the C2 level, you should be comfortable with unexpected questions, with interruptions, with fast changes in topic. That means practicing improvisation. Don't just prepare speeches in advance. Practice thinking aloud. Pick a random object near you, maybe a pen or a coffee mug, and start talking about it for 2 minutes without stopping. Describe it, invent a story about it, argue why it's important. The goal is to train your brain to keep producing language even when you have no preparation. This skill gives you confidence in real conversations, where you never know exactly what will be said next. One common challenge advanced learners face is that they sound correct but not natural. Their sentences are fine, but their rhythm feels slightly off, or their word choice feels a little too formal, or they hesitate in places where a native speaker wouldn't. To fix this, shadowing is your best friend. Take recordings of native speakers, especially in the style of speech you want to improve, and repeat after them, copying not only the words but the intonation, the emotion, the pauses. If you practice like this every day, even for 5 minutes, your speaking will start to carry that natural flow. Over time, your mouth learns the rhythm and your brain stops translating. At C2, vocabulary becomes another area where you can shine. You already know thousands of words, but now it's about precision and variety. Instead of always saying good, you can say excellent, outstanding, remarkable, brilliant, depending on the context. Instead of always saying bad, you can say awful, unpleasant, dreadful, subpar. You can also use idiomatic expressions naturally, like to cut corners, to go the extra mile, to be on the same page. The trick is not just to know these words and phrases, but to use them at the right moment. That's what makes your speech colorful and engaging. Another important part of advanced speaking is storytelling. Humans are natural storytellers, and being able to tell a story well in English makes you sound fluent and charismatic. A good story has structure. A beginning that sets the scene, a middle with tension or conflict, and an end with resolution. Practice telling stories about your own life, but also invent stories or retell news articles in your own words. Focus on creating suspense, using descriptive language, and bringing the listener into your world. When you can do this, people don't just listen to your English, they listen to you. Now, let's address the emotional side of speaking because at C2, confidence is everything. You might already have the skills, but nerves can still make you hesitate, make you lose words, make you sound less fluent than you actually are. The solution is exposure. The more you speak, the less scary it becomes. Join discussions, find language exchange partners, record yourself speaking, and listen back. At first, you might cringe at your own mistakes, but with practice, you'll start to notice how much better you sound over time. That's when your confidence grows, and confidence is what makes your fluency shine. Something else that will help you at this level is awareness of register. Register means the level of formality in your speech. At C2, you want to be able to move smoothly between registers. In a job interview, you use formal, polite English. With friends, you use slang, idioms, and a more relaxed tone. With children, you simplify your language and use more expression. Being able to shift register shows not only fluency, but also cultural competence. It shows you understand not just the language, but the social rules behind it. Finally, I want you to remember that speaking at C2 is not about perfection. Even native speakers hesitate, forget words, repeat themselves. The difference is that they keep going confidently. So instead of chasing perfection, chase connection. Speak to communicate, not to impress. If you focus on expressing your ideas clearly and engagingly, your fluency will grow naturally and people will enjoy talking with you. So, as you continue your journey to C2, make speaking a daily habit. Don't wait for perfect opportunities, create them. Talk to yourself, talk to others, record yourself, shadow native speakers, practice storytelling, practice persuasion, play with intonation, explore idioms, experiment with register. The more you speak, the more flexible and natural your English will become, until one day you realize you're not thinking about speaking anymore. You're just speaking, and English is flowing out of you like your own language. That is the true power of C2 speaking, and that's where I want to help you go. When we think about advanced English, most learners immediately picture speaking and listening, but at the C2 level, reading becomes just as important because reading is the gateway to vocabulary growth, to cultural knowledge, and to the kind of critical thinking that makes you sound not only fluent but educated and sophisticated. Reading at the earlier stages is often about understanding the main idea, guessing vocabulary from context, and being able to answer comprehension questions. But at C2, reading is about going much deeper. It's about analyzing tone, recognizing subtle shifts in meaning, identifying rhetorical strategies, appreciating literary devices, and connecting what you read to broader cultural and intellectual contexts. At this stage, you don't just read to understand. You read to interpret, to evaluate, to enjoy the richness of English in all its forms. Let's begin with the types of texts you should be reading. At C2, textbooks and simplified articles are no longer enough. You should be challenging yourself with authentic, Complex material. That means novels, essays, opinion pieces in major newspapers, academic research articles, speeches, and even poetry. Each of these forms pushes you in different ways. Novels expose you to narrative structure, description, and dialogue. Essays challenge your ability to follow arguments and counterarguments. Research articles train your eye to read dense, technical prose. Poetry introduces rhythm, metaphor, and ambiguity. By stretching across all these forms, you expose yourself to the full spectrum of English, and that's how your reading ability reaches mastery. Now, let's talk about how to approach a text at C2. At lower levels, you might have read word by word, translating in your head, or you might have skimmed quickly for the main idea. At C2, you want to move between these modes flexibly. Sometimes you skim to get the overall sense. Sometimes you slow down to study a paragraph in detail. Sometimes you pause to notice how a particular word choice changes the meaning. This flexibility is what makes your reading powerful. For example, imagine you're reading a political article. Skimming helps you see the general argument, but close reading helps you notice the subtle bias of the writer, the metaphors they use to influence opinion, the way they structure paragraphs to build tension. That level of reading shows you don't just understand English, you understand communication in English. Another skill at this level is recognizing tone. Tone is the attitude of the writer, and at C2 you should be able to hear it clearly in the text. Is the writer being serious, ironic, hopeful, angry, playful, or skeptical? Tone is often hidden not in the meaning of the words but in the style, the choice of adjectives, the rhythm of the sentences, the use of exaggeration or understatement. For example, when a writer says, "Of course, the government's new plan will definitely solve all our problems," just like the last one did, the literal words look positive, but the tone is sarcastic. At C2, catching these signals is essential because tone is what makes reading authentic. Let's also explore idiomatic and figurative language because reading is one of the best ways to absorb it. Writers, especially in literature and journalism, love to use metaphors, similes, idioms, and cultural references. If you only focus on the literal meaning, you miss half the beauty. For instance, if a character in a novel says, "He finally kicked the bucket," you need to know it doesn't mean he literally kicked something, but that he died. If an article says, "The new policy is a double-edged sword," you need to understand it means the policy has both positive and negative effects. At C2, when you encounter these expressions, you don't just memorize them, you notice how they are used, in what kind of context, with what kind of tone. That way, when you use them in your own speaking and writing, they come out naturally. Now, let's go deeper into literature, because literature is one of the richest resources for advanced learners. Reading novels or plays in English allows you to see how language can create emotion, build character, and reflect society. For example, reading Shakespeare might feel challenging, but it teaches you the roots of English idioms and the rhythm of poetic expression. Reading modern authors shows you contemporary slang, cultural issues, and the way English adapts in different settings. Literature also forces you to read between the lines. Characters often don't say exactly what they mean. Their actions, tone, and context reveal hidden messages. At C2, this ability to infer, to interpret what is not directly said, is essential. Academic reading is another area where C2 learners need to excel. Research papers, theoretical essays, and technical manuals use a very dense style of English, with long sentences, complex vocabulary, and specialized terminology. At first, these texts can feel overwhelming, but remember, you don't need to understand every single word to understand the message. At C2, your goal is to identify the thesis, follow the argument, recognize the evidence, and evaluate the logic. One good practice is to take a difficult article and try to summarize it in your own words. This shows you not only understood it, but also processed it deeply enough to explain it. That is exactly the kind of skill universities and employers look for when they want advanced English proficiency. Critical reading is another key ability at this stage. Critical reading means you don't just accept everything you read, you analyze it. You ask yourself, what is the writer's purpose? What assumptions are they making? What evidence do they give? What's missing? Do I agree with them? This skill is essential not just for exams, but for real life, because in a world full of information, being able to question and evaluate texts makes you an independent thinker, not just a language learner. And the beautiful thing is that practicing critical reading in English also strengthens your critical thinking in general. But let's not forget about enjoyment. Reading in English at the C2 level should not feel like homework. It should feel like a door opening into new worlds. When you read a novel, you get to live in another person's mind. When you read history, you travel in time. When you read science, you explore the universe. English gives you access to an enormous library of knowledge and imagination, and at C2, you finally have the ability to enjoy it fully. So choose books and articles that excite you, not just ones that feel educational. The more you love what you read, the more naturally your reading skills grow. Now, a common question advanced learners ask me is, should I still use a dictionary? At this level, my answer is, use it wisely. Don't stop every time you see a new word, or you'll lose the flow. Instead, try to guess from context first. Often, you don't need the exact definition to keep reading. But if a word keeps appearing, or if it seems crucial to the meaning, then yes, look it up and then immediately try to use it in your own sentence. That way, you're not just passively collecting definitions, you're actively making the word part of your vocabulary. Speaking of vocabulary, reading is the best way to grow it at C2.
Why?
Because you see words in context. When you read, you don't just learn the word resilient. You see it used to describe a community after a disaster or a person overcoming hardship. You learn the feeling of the word, not just the translation. And by seeing words in different contexts, you start to understand the subtle differences between near synonyms. For example, resilient, strong, and tough all mean something similar, but each carries a different shade. Reading gives you that nuance. One final tip for C2 reading is to make it interactive. Don't just read silently and move on. Read aloud sometimes to practice pronunciation and rhythm. Keep a reading journal where you write down interesting phrases or your reflections on what you read. Join book clubs or online discussions in English where you share your thoughts. The more you interact with the text, the more alive it becomes, and the more your skills improve. So, my dear learners, when you embrace reading at C2, you're not just learning English, you're entering into a global conversation. You're reading the same novels, articles, and research that millions of English speakers around the world are reading. You're understanding jokes, arguments, metaphors, and ideas at the same level as them. And that is an incredibly empowering feeling. Reading is what gives your English depth, And at this advanced stage, it's what makes you not just fluent, but truly literate in the language. Writing in English at the C2 level is one of the most exciting, but also one of the most challenging skills to master, because at this point it's no longer just about putting sentences together correctly. It's about expressing yourself with clarity, with elegance, with logic, and with style. When you write at C2, your words should not only be correct but also compelling, able to inform, persuade, or inspire depending on your purpose. Many learners think of writing as the most academic of the 4 skills, and it's true that a lot of C2 writing practice comes from essays, reports, and research papers, but writing at this level can also be deeply creative, personal, and artistic. The beauty of C2 writing is that you gain the ability to move smoothly across all these domains. You can write an email that sounds polite yet confident, an essay that is well-structured and critical, a story that captures emotion, or a social media post that sounds natural and engaging. That flexibility is the real marker of advanced writing ability. So let's start by talking about academic and formal writing, because this is where many learners are tested, whether in exams, at university, or in professional contexts. At C2, you need to be able to construct clear, logical, and persuasive arguments. That means writing with a strong structure, an introduction that sets up the topic and your position, body paragraphs that develop your ideas with evidence and examples, and a conclusion that ties everything together and leaves the reader with a clear impression. But structure alone is not enough. At this level, you also need to show critical thinking, which means not just repeating information, but analyzing it, comparing perspectives, recognizing limitations, and offering your own interpretation. For example, if you're writing about climate change, it's not enough to say, climate change is a problem. You need to present data, contrast different viewpoints, consider counterarguments, and then explain why your conclusion is stronger. That is what academic readers expect at C2. Another feature of strong academic writing is cohesion, the way your sentences and paragraphs connect. At earlier levels, you might have used simple connectors like and, but, so, or because. At C2, you want a much wider range so that your text flows smoothly. You can use phrases like on the contrary, in addition, by contrast, to illustrate this point, nevertheless, to a large extent, or with this in mind. These advanced connectors show your reader the logical relationships between your ideas, and they give your writing a professional polish. But remember, cohesion is not just about words. It's also about rhythm, about how long and short sentences combine, about how each paragraph builds naturally from the one before. That rhythm makes your writing pleasant to read. Now, let's move into professional writing, because in today's world, many of you will use English in emails, reports, proposals, and presentations. At C2, your professional writing should be precise, polite, and effective. It should avoid unnecessary complexity while still showing sophistication. For example, when writing an email, you don't want to sound too formal and distant, but you also don't want to sound casual or careless. The balance might look like this. I hope this message finds you well. I'm writing to follow up on our previous discussion regarding the project timeline. Could you kindly confirm whether the updated schedule works for your team? This is polite, clear, and professional. Professional writing is often about tone, about striking that right balance, and at C2 you need to adapt your tone depending on your audience. More formal with executives, more direct with colleagues, more persuasive with clients. Creative writing, on the other hand, gives you freedom to play with language, and at C2, you should not be afraid to explore it. Writing stories, poems, or even creative essays lets you experiment with imagery, metaphor, rhythm, and emotion. In creative writing, it's not just what you say, but how you say it. For example, instead of writing, "The sun set and it got dark," you might write, "The sun melted into the horizon, leaving the sky bruised purple and gold, and the first shadows stretched their fingers across the earth." Notice how the imagery and rhythm create mood. Practicing creative writing improves your overall control of English because it makes you more sensitive to style, to connotation, to the musicality of words. And don't think creative writing is only for artists. Even in business or academic writing, the ability to write vividly, to choose words that resonate, makes your work stand out. One of the greatest challenges at C2 is mastering register and style in writing. Register refers to the level of formality and the type of language appropriate for a given context. For example, if you're texting a friend, you might write, "Hey, want to grab a coffee later?" But if you are writing to your professor, you might write, "Would you be available for a meeting later today to discuss the assignment?" The difference is not about correctness, but about appropriateness. At C2, you should be able to move across registers smoothly. This skill shows that you not only know English, but also understand the social and cultural norms of English communication. Another aspect of C2 writing is precision. Precision means choosing the exact word that fits your meaning. At lower levels, you might use broad terms like thing, nice, or bad. At C2, you want sharper choices. Instead of thing, you might write aspect, factor, element, or component, depending on the context. Instead of nice, you might say pleasant, delightful, thoughtful, or generous. Instead of bad, you might say harmful, inadequate, disappointing, or detrimental. Precision shows maturity in your writing. It communicates your ideas clearly without leaving the reader confused. Grammar at this level also plays a role in sophistication. It's not just about avoiding mistakes anymore. It's about using complex structures for effect. You might use inversion for emphasis, as in rarely have I seen such dedication. You might use conditional sentences to explore possibilities. Had the company invested earlier, the results might have been different. You might use nominalization to create a formal tone. The implementation of new policies resulted in greater efficiency. These advanced structures give your writing variety and depth. But here's something I want you to remember. Advanced writing is not about making everything complicated. In fact, some of the best writing is simple, clear, and direct. Complexity should serve a purpose, not be decoration. If you can say something in a short, powerful sentence, do it. At C2, you have the flexibility to choose. You can write long, complex sentences when you want to explain something deeply, and you can write short, sharp sentences when you want impact. That balance is what makes your writing effective. Editing is another skill that becomes essential at this stage. Great writers are not just people who write well. They are people who rewrite well. After writing a draft, go back and ask yourself, is my argument clear? Is my structure logical? Are my words precise? Are there unnecessary repetitions? Could I make this sentence smoother? Editing is where your writing grows from good to excellent. Even professional authors revise their work many times before publication. At C2, you should be comfortable doing the same. Now, Let's consider how writing connects with other skills. Writing is not an isolated activity. It builds on your reading, your listening, and your speaking. When you read widely, you absorb vocabulary, expressions, and styles that later appear in your writing. When you listen carefully, you notice rhythm and phrasing that you can imitate in written form. When you speak, you practice expressing ideas spontaneously, which later helps you write more naturally. So, improving your writing is not just about writing more. It's about feeding your brain with rich input from all directions. Another tip for advanced learners is to keep a personal writing practice. It could be a journal, essays, blog posts, or even social media entries in English. The important thing is to make writing a habit. Don't wait for assignments or exams. Write for yourself. Write about your day, your thoughts, your dreams, your opinions. Over time, you'll see patterns in your writing. You'll notice which words you repeat too often, which structures you rely on, and where you can stretch yourself. This self-awareness is crucial at C2. Finally, remember that writing is about connection. Whether you're writing an academic essay, a professional report, or a personal story, your goal is always to connect with your reader. Don't write just to show off your English. Write to communicate something meaningful. When your writing has purpose, it becomes stronger, and your reader feels engaged. At C2, that's the difference between correct writing and powerful writing. So, as you continue your journey, embrace writing not as a duty, but as an art, as a craft, as a way of shaping your thoughts and sharing them with the world. The more you write, the more precise, creative, and confident you become, until one day you realize that English is no longer just a tool for you. It's a voice, a pen, a canvas, and you are fully capable of using it to express yourself at the highest level. That is the true beauty of writing at C2, and that is the skill I want you to carry with you as you grow. One of the most overlooked but absolutely crucial parts of reaching and maintaining C2 level English is your mindset and your learning strategies, because the truth is that once you get this far in your journey, the biggest challenges are no longer grammar exercises or vocabulary lists, but motivation, consistency, and the ability to push yourself when no one else is telling you what to do. At earlier levels, you probably had a teacher giving you assignments, a textbook guiding your path, or an exam pushing you forward. But at C2, you are your own teacher. You are responsible for choosing what to read, what to listen to, how to practice, and how to keep improving. This independence can feel liberating, but it can also feel overwhelming. That's why developing the right mindset is essential, because it keeps you moving, it keeps you hungry, and it helps you avoid the dreaded plateau that so many advanced learners face. Let's talk about the plateau first, because almost every learner hits it. At the beginning of your English journey, progress feels fast. Every new word is exciting. Every new grammar structure feels like a breakthrough, and you can measure your growth week by week. But at C2, progress becomes subtle, almost invisible. You already understand movies, you can already hold conversations, you can already read books, so the improvements are in the details. The precision of your word choice, the smoothness of your intonation, the sophistication of your writing. These improvements are real, but they are harder to notice, and because they are harder to notice, many learners feel like they are stuck. The truth is, you are not stuck, you are refining. And refinement takes patience. If you keep practicing, keep exposing yourself to challenging input, and keep pushing yourself to express complex ideas, you're growing, even if the growth is not dramatic. So, how do you keep yourself motivated when progress feels slow? One key is to set goals that are not only about language but also about life. Instead of saying, I want to learn 50 new words this week, you might say, I want to read this fascinating novel in English and be able to discuss it with a friend. Instead of saying, I want to practice speaking for 20 minutes, you might say, I want to be able to tell the story of my childhood in English in a way that really captures the emotion. These kinds of goals are meaningful, and meaningful goals give you energy. At C2, you're not just learning English for exams. You're learning English to live in it, to think in it, to connect with people through it. Discipline also becomes vital at this stage because motivation will come and go, but discipline is what keeps you steady. Discipline means building habits that make English a natural part of your day. Maybe you read a few pages of an English book before bed every night. Maybe you listen to a podcast while making breakfast. Maybe you journal in English every morning for 10 minutes. These habits may seem small, but over months and years, they are what keep your skills sharp and growing. And the beauty of habits is that once they are formed, they no longer require motivation. They run on autopilot. That's why at C2, you should think less about dramatic study sessions and more about sustainable daily routines. Autonomy is another feature of advanced learning. Autonomy means you don't wait for someone else to tell you what to study. You take charge. You notice your own weaknesses and design strategies to fix them. For example, maybe you realize that you understand academic English well, but you struggle with casual slang. Instead of waiting for a teacher to assign it, you deliberately watch sitcoms or listen to YouTube creators who use slang. Or maybe you notice that your writing is strong but your speaking lacks spontaneity. Then you create opportunities for spontaneous speaking, join live discussions, practice debates, or even challenge yourself to record daily speaking videos. This kind of self-directed learning is what keeps you advancing long after formal classes are over. Another mindset shift that helps at C2 is embracing mistakes. Many advanced learners become perfectionists. They don't want to speak unless they sound flawless. They don't want to write unless every sentence is polished. They don't want to share ideas unless they're sure the grammar is correct. But this perfectionism actually slows you down because it makes you afraid to experiment. The reality is that even at C2, you'll still make mistakes, and that's not a problem. In fact, mistakes are signs that you're pushing into new territory. The goal is not zero mistakes. The goal is fearless communication and continuous learning. If you can embrace mistakes as part of growth, you will stay motivated instead of discouraged. Let's also talk about curiosity, because curiosity is one of the greatest motivators at C2. Instead of thinking, I need to practice English, start thinking, I want to explore the world through English. Maybe you are curious about psychology, so you read articles and watch lectures in English. Maybe you are curious about cooking, so you follow English recipes and watch food channels. Maybe you are curious about history, technology, art, or fashion. Use English as your tool to explore those subjects. That way, you are not studying the language in isolation. You are using it as a bridge to the things you love. This keeps your learning exciting and personal. Community is another important part of staying motivated. Language is social, and even at C2, you need people around you to keep you inspired. Find discussion groups, join book clubs, participate in online forums, attend events where English is spoken. When you connect with others, you not only practice your skills but also share your journey, celebrate your progress, and support each other through challenges. And the truth is, learning with others is simply more fun. At C2, it's easy to hide in your comfort zone, reading and listening quietly by yourself. But growth often happens when you put yourself out there, when you engage with real people, when you challenge yourself in live interaction. Now, let's think about the bigger picture of mindset. At C2, English is not just a subject, it's part of your identity. You've invested years into learning it, and now it's a tool you can use to connect with the world. So don't see English as something you have to study all the time. See it as something you live. Think of yourself as a bilingual or multilingual person. Think of yourself as someone who belongs in the global conversation. When you shift your identity like this, your motivation becomes natural because you're not forcing yourself to learn. You're simply being who you are. Finally, remember that the journey never really ends. Even native speakers continue to learn new words, new styles, new ways of expressing themselves. So instead of thinking, I will finish English one day, think, I will keep growing in English all my life. This mindset takes the pressure away and turns the process into a lifelong adventure. Every book you read, every conversation you have, every article you write is part of that adventure. And when you look back after a year, after 5 years, after 10 years, you'll be amazed at how much you've grown simply because you kept going with patience, with discipline, with curiosity, and with joy. So, my dear learners, if you want to thrive at C2, focus not only on what you study, but on how you think. Build habits that keep English in your life every day. Stay curious about the world and use English to explore it. Embrace mistakes as stepping stones. Surround yourself with community. See yourself as someone who lives in English, not just someone who learns it. If you do that, you will never plateau, you will never lose motivation, and you will continue to rise higher and higher until English feels as natural to you as your first language. That is the power of mindset at C2, and that is what I want you to carry with you for the rest of your journey. When you reach C2 level, something magical happens. You realize that English is no longer just a language you study, it becomes a world you live in. At this stage, immersion is no longer about forcing yourself to practice. It's about weaving English so deeply into your daily life that it feels as natural as breathing. Immersion is not only about being surrounded by words, it's about surrounding yourself with culture, with perspectives, with the very heartbeat of English-speaking communities. And this is what truly takes you from being an advanced learner to being almost indistinguishable from a native speaker, not because you know every slang word or every idiom, but because you live and think in English with ease, confidence, and authenticity. So, let's start with what immersion really means. Many people think immersion just means traveling to an English-speaking country, but the truth is, immersion is a mindset and a lifestyle. Yes, living in London, New York, Sydney, or Toronto can give you exposure, but you don't have to move abroad to immerse yourself. You can build immersion right where you are if you know how to do it. Immersion is about creating an environment where English is the default, where English is not something extra, but the natural background of your daily experiences. That means choosing English in the little decisions, the language of the shows you watch, the podcasts you follow, the books you read, the websites you visit, even the settings on your phone. If you surround yourself with English constantly, your brain begins to accept it not as the foreign language, but simply as the language. That's the immersion mindset. Cultural immersion goes even deeper. At C2, you don't just want to understand words, You want to understand context, humor, references, and the unspoken layers of communication. For example, if you watch a British comedy show, you might hear jokes that reference local politics, cultural habits, or wordplay. At first, you might not get all of it, but the more you immerse yourself, the more these references become familiar, and suddenly you're laughing along, not because you translated the words, but because you feel the culture behind them. That's the kind of immersion that builds true fluency. It's about being curious not only about the language, but also about the stories, the history, the values, and the traditions of English-speaking societies. Another powerful form of immersion is human connection. Nothing accelerates your growth like real relationships in English. When you build friendships, join communities, or even work with colleagues in English, you're forced to communicate authentically. You can't prepare a script. You have to respond in real time, with all the nuance of tone, humor, and emotion. These relationships also expose you to the way people truly speak, not the textbook version, but the living language, full of idioms, slang, inside jokes, and subtle cultural references. And perhaps most importantly, when you connect with people in English, the language stops being a school subject and becomes a bridge between you and another human being. That's what makes immersion powerful. It makes English personal. Immersion also means training your brain to think in English as much as possible. At lower levels, you might translate from your first language in your head, but at C2, translation slows you down. The goal is to make English your natural mode of thought. One way to practice this is through inner dialogue, talking to yourself in English in your mind. For example, when you are cooking, narrate the steps to yourself in English. Okay, now I'll chop the onions, heat the pan, add some oil. Or when you are walking, think in English about what you see. The air feels cool today. The leaves are turning yellow. The city feels alive. By making English your mental voice, you strengthen the pathways in your brain until thinking in English becomes automatic. Let's also talk about identity, because immersion at C2 is not only about skills, it's about who you become. When you immerse yourself fully, English becomes part of your identity. You don't just say, I study English. You say, I live in English. I am bilingual. I belong to this global community. This shift in identity is powerful because it changes your confidence. You stop feeling like an outsider trying to join a conversation, and you start feeling like someone who naturally belongs in it. You stop worrying about sounding perfect, and you start focusing on expressing yourself authentically. You stop treating English as something external, and you start carrying it inside yourself as part of who you are. One of the most enjoyable ways to immerse yourself is through art and media. Movies, music, books, and shows are not just entertainment, they are windows into the soul of the language. At C2, you can challenge yourself with more complex content. Films with layered dialogue, novels with rich descriptions, news analysis with advanced vocabulary. But don't just consume passively, engage with it. After watching a movie, talk or write about what you thought of the characters. After reading an article, debate the ideas with a friend. After listening to a song, look up the lyrics and reflect on the emotions. This active engagement is what transforms entertainment into immersion. Immersion also extends to creativity. Don't just consume English. Create in English. Write stories, record videos, join discussions, make content online. When you create, you're not only practicing your skills, but also contributing to the English-speaking world. Imagine writing a blog post in English that people from around the world can read. Imagine recording a YouTube video in English that inspires someone across the ocean. Imagine writing a story in English that makes a stranger laugh or cry. That is the ultimate level of immersion, when you stop being just a learner and start being a creator in English. Travel, of course, can be a powerful form of immersion if you have the opportunity. Visiting an English-speaking country forces you into real situations, ordering food, asking for directions, chatting with locals. But here's the key: don't just stay in tourist bubbles. Push yourself to interact deeply. Go to local events, volunteer, join interest groups. The more you step into real community life, the more your English grows in authentic, unexpected ways. But remember, even if travel is not possible, the internet gives you incredible access. Online communities, video calls, forums, and virtual events mean you can immerse yourself globally without leaving your home. Another important part of immersion is emotional connection. When you attach emotions to your experiences in English, they stick more deeply in your memory. For example, if you watch a movie that makes you cry, the phrases and expressions in that movie will stay with you. If you laugh with a friend over a joke in English, you'll remember that laughter long after the words. If you feel proud after giving a presentation in English, that confidence becomes part of your identity. So seek out experiences in English that move you emotionally, because those experiences are the ones that truly make the language yours. Let's also recognize that immersion is not about perfection, but about persistence. Even if you live fully in English, there will still be words you don't know, references you don't understand, or moments when you feel lost. That's normal, even for native speakers. The difference at C2 is that you don't panic. You use context, you ask questions, you adapt. You keep going, knowing that every confusing moment is another step toward deeper understanding. Immersion teaches resilience, because it shows you that language is not about knowing everything, it's about staying engaged even when you don't. Ultimately, immersion is a lifestyle choice. It's about deciding that English is not a subject you study once a week, but a living part of your daily world. It's about choosing English in small ways every day, choosing to think in it, to read in it, to speak in it, to dream in it. And when you live like this, something extraordinary happens. English stops being foreign. It becomes yours. It becomes the voice in which you think, the tool with which you connect, the lens through which you see the world. That is the magic of immersion, and that is the final step to becoming not just a learner of English, but a true citizen of the English-speaking world. So, as we wrap up this journey through the C2 level, remember this: English is not just knowledge you collect, it's a life you live. And immersion is the key to living it fully. Surround yourself with the language, embrace the culture, connect with people, create in English, and let it shape not just your communication but your very identity. Do this, and you will not only maintain your C2 level, you will go beyond it into a place where English is as natural to you as your first language, where you're not just fluent but free.